Welcome to Pirate Living Podcast. We are your hosts, Karan and Kristen. On this podcast, we are highlighting ordinary people living extraordinary lives. These are pirates who take small, bold actions daily to create social change. Pirate life is all about rebelling and breaking the rules for good. Creating lasting social change starts by first breaking our inner rules. After all, the hardest rules to break are your own. The pirates we highlight have dedicated themselves to creating good trouble.
Today we are talking with Katherine Spallino, author of the book The Bad Cadet, Growing Up in the Church of Scientology's Sea Organization. Katherine grew up on a secluded ranch within the cadet org, the Church of Scientology's Sea Org school for children. At a young age, Katherine began to journal about her day-to-day life, capturing the thoughts and experiences of a child coming to age in a cult. Katherine's background offers the rare opportunity to tell the story of the hundreds of children who rarely saw their parents and were indoctrinated to become future Sea Org members. Katherine is no longer a Scientologist and lives in Minneapolis with her husband, happily raising 3 rambunctious boys. And Katherine, we're so happy to be chatting with you today.
I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. When I saw you wanted to talk about your story, I was so excited to dig into it. But before we do, we warned you ahead of time. We have a poem that Google AI has created. Would you like to hear the poem that Google wrote for you?
Oh, absolutely.
All right. Katherine Spallino, a woman of courage. She speaks her truth, no matter the consequence. She grew up in a cult, but she escaped and told her story. Now she is an author and speaker, inspiring others to break free from their own chains. She is a true hero, and we are lucky to have her. Thank you, Katherine, for your bravery. You are a role model for us all. Your story is one of hope and resilience, and it will continue to inspire people for years to come. Thank you for sharing your light with the world.
Oh, I love it. Thanks, Google.
Yeah,
Wow.
Google's really good. Yeah, like doing the boosting up of like keep shining that light in your world. It might not rhyme, but it's really good, like pet person.
Yes, I love it. I think anytime I need affirmations, I should just go to Google then.
So yeah, Katherine, you grew up in Scientology, and we really want to dig in and hear your pirate journey, what led you to where you are today. But also, before we begin, do you want to give our listeners just a brief explanation on Scientology and what things they may need to know in order to understand what it's about and what it was like for you? What is Scientology like, other than Tom Cruise jumping on couches and those things that people might have heard?
Yes. Yeah, I'd be happy to. So Scientology was invented by L. Ron Hubbard. He actually first wrote a book called Dianetics in 1950s. And that was released. And from there, a few years, like 10 years down the road, he developed Scientology itself. And that kind of took over the name. But it's people join it, and they join it with the idea of they're going to have freedom of thought. They're going to become better people. They're going to be, they wouldn't call it enlightened, but that's basically what they're trying to go for. And they have what's called a bridge, and they pay money to go up these steps that you take. So like whether it's courses or auditing, which is similar to counseling, but we could really go into that, but I won't do that. And people who are in it go up these steps and feel like they're being enlightened, and they're going to also help save the world because they're becoming better people. That's why people are in Scientology. Now, when you're in Scientology itself, you don't realize that slowly your group that becomes more and more closeted, and the outside world becomes more and more distant. And they do that because anything you read or any information you get is only from Scientology. Any doubt or questions about it, they don't want to hear it. They're not going to read it. So you could wonder, why are people still Scientologists when all this stuff is out there, especially like if people are following the news, Danny Masterson, everything that happened there where he actually raped women who were Scientologists and the church covered it up. So it's like, how could people still call themselves Scientologists? They don't believe any of that, and they're just going to shut their eyes to it. That's like such a broad example of Scientology. So we could definitely dive in deeper. And my book talks about growing up in Scientology, and I think can really capture what it was like for me as a child growing up not just in Scientology, like as a parishioner, but actually my parents worked for the church. So they had dedicated my life to the church. And this is since I was a baby. So I didn't have a choice in it. I was just doing it.
Yeah. Actually, so before we go on, I actually do want to talk on the Danny Masterson stuff, because I was telling Kristen, I'm so excited to talk to you about this, because I'm just like been enthralled in this in the last like whatever week. Is that then why so many, especially Scientologist actors and actresses have been writing those letters of support for Danny in terms of like for his sentencing, because they just don't necessarily believe it?
Well, those people, only one of them was, I don't know if he still is a Scientologist, Ethan Suplee was a Scientologist. The other ones, they did, like, they would support Danny. I think they just literally were like ignorant to what it means when somebody's actually convicted of rape. And they're like, he's a good person. It's like, no, he raped women. Like, you can't be like, because he's these things, we should like try to ignore what happened over here. That was just people not really
Gotcha. I thought there was more connection, like with people like Laura Prepon, and like
she is a Scientologist, so she would definitely be up for writing that note.
Yeah.
Regarding, I don't know if the listeners would have followed all this, but the women who were raped were Scientologists, so they were discouraged from even reporting the rape. They were just, and they were even told, don't say rape. Some of them were even told, like, this was your fault. You made this happen, and like they had to do work to make up for it, or pay for counseling to make up for it, instead of, you know, Danny Masterson being caught for what he was. And he was able to, there's actually other victims who were also raped, but they didn't have a strong enough case to bring to court. So he had this, like, the church protecting him, basically.
Yeah. And I did, like, I was thinking about it too, and then not to go off on, like, not to make this a Danny Masterson podcast, but like the fact, I mean, the fact that like this person of like the highest level of privilege in our society, you've got a white male actor, rich, with the church backing him, that like for that conviction that he got 30 years, like it really makes me want to find out more. Because if you think of like Brock Turner got like 3 months for getting caught in the act of like raping the girl in the back alley, that like I want to know more, because a 30-year sentence is quite significant for sexual assault, like I said, from basically a person of almost the highest level of privilege in our society. So it just made me like really, really interested in this whole case. So I just want to throw that out there.
I would be, if it's okay with you, my friend who actually was an editor with my book, she grew up with me. She has a podcast, if that's okay for me to mention.
Yeah, of course.
It's called The Lighthouse Project, and she dives into what happened on this trial, and they go each court moment, like they like dive into it. They dive up into the Scientology part of it, what Scientology had to play in it. So if anybody really wants to know, like, what was the evidence? How were they convicted? How did the church cover up? What part did the church have to play, and what did Danny Masterson, like, literally what was his actions? All of it is laid out in their podcast. It's amazing. They've have like, I think like, I'm going to say like 10 episodes already.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It's a deep dive. It's a deep dive, but it's so informative. And I think anybody who wants to know more about Danny Masterson can definitely go there.
Absolutely. You said The Lighthouse Project?
Yes.
Perfect.
And Miriam Francis is my friend. We grew up together, and she's in my book.
Hey.
Perfect. Yeah. I will be downloading all 10 episodes.
Yeah.
and I'll throw out while we're talking podcasts too. So like for any of listeners, if you really want to know more about Scientology, to a quick place to go and learn a little bit more, A Little Bit Culty is a great podcast for learning about cults. And there's an episode with Mike Rinder, who was very high up in Sea Org. So want to know more information without me like asking Katherine to explain everything to us, go there.
Yes, and SPTV on YouTube is huge right now. All of these people who are second generation Scientologists are all speaking out now, and there's a whole thing, and you could see it if you read my book. The amount of fear to speak out is really real. So huge thing that all these people are like, wait, like let's just speak out and be brave together. And I think that makes more people want to speak out, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
TV, check that out too.
Yeah.
And that, so when you speak out, and I'm assuming SP, that's what is it?
Suppressive person.
Suppressive person. I was gonna say submissive. No, it's a different thing. Suppressive person.
Yeah,
Okay.
we're considered like evil.
Yeah.
And I never was given a suppressive, what they call declare a piece of paper. They don't do that anymore because they was getting published on the internet. But it's like you're excommunicated from the church. No one could talk to you, and so on.
Yeah. I've been digging into things on cults lately. So I was reading a book by Amanda Montell called Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism. She has like a whole chapter too on like the language of Scientology and how that's meant to make the group feel very, very important while outside people have no idea what is going on. So yeah, there may be some terminology that gets thrown out too that's like, what's this? But yeah.
So many words. Yeah.
And you grew up in it. So yeah, I'm sure some of it too was like a little bit of what was Scientology language and what's quote unquote normal speak. But yeah, we'd love to dig into your story since you were born into Scientology to Scientologist parents. You were raised by Scientology. So, I grew up in the Christian church and was like very much into that growing up, but there became a point too in your life where you realized like, this isn't all I thought it was. So we'd love to hear your story of, your journey, or what we like to call your pirate journey.
Yes, I love it. Yeah, so my book is called The Bad Cadet, referencing me as being bad because growing up, I would always get into trouble. So I'm a pirate by nature, right? I'll hold it up. I don't know if you guys do everybody's soldiers. It's probably backwards, but I'm the young woman in pink, just causing chaos. Growing up, I thought everything was like normal. I thought it was normal that I wasn't with my parents. I thought it was normal. I was sent away to a boarding school at 8 years old. And I was with other girls of my age, and then boys were in the boys' dorm. And we were told, you guys are going to be future SEAG members. We would study Scientology studies along with regular school, but not enough regular school to compensate like the time-wise. It was half and half Scientology studies and regular school. And for the most part, I was happy. I thought it was like going to be saving the world. I saw my parents every once in a while, no big deal, which looking back now, I'm like, wow, as a mother of 3 boys, I'm like, who was nurturing me, who was taking care of me, but I didn't know any of that. And so my book really tries to capture that childhood of how much I really believe in Scientology, like, and how much it was helpful and how good it was. And this is what I'm going to do. But then as I get older, as a teenager, a lot of teenagers tend to rebel, but most teenagers in our situation do not, because we have such rigid rules and structure. But I couldn't help myself, and I would always get into trouble for really silly teenage stuff. And then the ramifications would be pretty large. Like I would be isolated from the group and not be able to talk to my friends. And that would happen for a couple months. And then I'll be like, this is when I would start to be like, well, maybe there's something better out there. And I was an avid reader. And that knowing of these other books, and they would let us watch movies on Saturday. So I had like those teenage movies that made high school look so fun, like, Can't Hardly Wait, or like 10 Things I Hate About You, and all those. I was like, I want to just go to high school. By the time I'm like 12, 13. So anytime I tried to have those thoughts, they would either be like pushed down because I wanted to be like, what's more important to me and my finding joy, or saving the world? When you like put those two next to each other, you kind of make yourself second. And you kind of follow me as I go through this, like, do I want to join the Sea Org and be in the Sea Org and be there and being like a robot existence? Or do I want to just go and have a life? And something that's very interesting about what they call SEAG members, people who work for the church, is around the late 1980s, they said no more children. You cannot have kids. So going into it as a teenager, knowing I wanted to have kids, and I was like, maybe it'll change the rule one day. And then I was like, realistically, they probably won't. So I had that also, like, I want to have fun, and I also want to have children one day. How do I stay in this environment when I can't even have things for myself? So that it was all selfish reasons of why I want to leave. It wasn't like, I know Scientology is bad or anything. So you kind of get more of a picture of Scientology, and the reader forms their own opinion about Scientology. And it's my opinion is like surprisingly kind because I didn't know any better. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, like your book starts off with almost painting your parents as superheroes because they're saving the world. And like, yes, I'm so excited. My parents are saving the world and I'm part of that. And I'm curious too, is the reasoning why they said no more kids because of like kids being born into Scientology, there's not going to be the same amount of money that goes into it? Or do you know the reasoning why they said no more kids for people in Sea Org?
In the Sea Org, they didn't want the distraction of children.
Oh, okay.
They had to find a place for them. They had to get a school for them. They had to educate them. And it was beginning to be too much. And whereas regular Scientology families, if you're just like a parishioner, but they don't call them parishioners, they call them public, but they can have children. And those second and third generations. So yeah, I was inside like the inner workings of the church, and those people can no longer have children. And so like in the Sea Org, there's a high amount of abortions that happen because women will get pregnant and then they get basically coerced or brainwashed into believing, oh, I need to not have this baby because I gotta be here in the Sea Org. Now, some people are strong enough mentally and they say, no, I want to have the baby. I'm going to leave the Sea Org and I'll still be a Scientologist, because you could still be a Scientologist, although you'd have to make up for leaving and like do work and pay money for leaving the Sea Org, but then you could be back in good standing. So there are people who have left and had children when they got pregnant in the Sea Org and they managed to leave, but that's not normal. Like a lot of women there end up choosing the church over their unborn child.
And so what is the draw of being a member of the Sea Org? Like why would
the world, literally you feel like the people there are like, oh, this is my purpose, and it sounds so vague and it's so ridiculous. Like when I say it, I'm saving the world, I'm clearing the world. But whenever something natural disaster happens, like I remember when 9/11 happened, like David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology, wrote this missive, this letter that got sent to all of us, and it's like, we must save the world. You guys see what's happening? Like, it's all on us. We need to clear people. We need to get people through up the bridge. So everything is like, the onus is like, we're the ones who are the only ones with the answer.
And how
a lot of churches like that.
Yeah. And how, or like, is it by recruiting more people into Scientology?
Yes. They want to recruit more people into Scientology and get them up the bridge, but the bridge costs about hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's really, I really can't say if David Miscavige actually believes he's saving people, or if he's like, he is definitely a lunatic, but does he believe what his lunacy? And L. Ron Hubbard too, like he made this all up, all of this, the bridge and stuff. I think a part of them did believe it, but then it's also a money hungry scheme of everything costs money. And the amount of money that the Scientologists pay is wild.
Yeah. It's almost like a religious pyramid scheme.
Yeah. Except for nobody, like even if you're right here in the pyramid scheme, you're not getting nothing. Only David Miscavige. So all these people are doing this in the Sea Org. A lot of them are actually really good people, like my parents, thinking they're doing something good, and they're broke. They have no money. If they left, where would they go? Like my parents are in their 70s. They don't talk to me anymore. And that's something we can talk about later. But if you speak out on Scientology, they will excommunicate you. So even if they left, they would lose everything they have behind. So for me to write this book was very frightening, because they had already actually stopped talking to me, because my best friend, Miriam Francis, and another good friend of mine at the time were on Leah Remini's show, and I had known about it. And just because I knew about it, my parents and my sister, who's still in the Sea Org as well, stopped talking to me. And they had been involved in my life. They knew I wasn't a Scientologist, but I was very good about not saying anything negative. I never said anything out on social media. So when my book came out, a lot of people were like, whoa, where did she come from? Like, this is wild, because they know who I am. My dad was a well-known, what's called a supervisor. It's somebody who like oversees training on Scientology. So a lot of public Scientology parishioners know who he is. And so I kept my name on there so that people were like, oh, this is the person, this is that child who's speaking out.
And so it's interesting that they stopped talking to you just because you knew that your friends were going to be on Leah Remini's show or documentary or show. I was
shocked, to be honest. Like I was like, first of all, ridiculous, but also it's not like they're my wife. Like,
Mhm.
like if I was connected in that way, because then it's like, I would be like, hey, like, I don't want to lose my family. It's sad that you would have to say that to your spouse because of that connection of like not wanting to lose your family. But for my friends, I'm like, yeah, speak your truth. Do what you want to do. Why would I ever censor you? So then my parents were upset that I knew about it and didn't report them because there's things called knowledge reports.
Mm.
It up. And I'm like, first of all, I'm not a Scientologist. Secondly, they're allowed to speak their truth. And then they're also not my wife. I don't understand why you guys are upset about this. Like, why don't you guys just listen to what they have to say? Maybe Scientology, the church, can do something and be better about how they've been in the past. But the church will never admit to doing anything wrong, or I've yet to see them do it. Now I want to say like the cult, really. It's not a church. It's like, it's a facade because they don't believe in God or anything like that.
Well, so and then so that brings up an interesting question then. If they don't believe in like a deity like that, then how do they have like a religion tax status?
Right? Isn't that wild? And if you watch those HBO documentaries like Going Clear, they will really break it down. But long story short, they sued all of the IRS. They found out the personal names of the people who worked in the IRS in the 90s and personally sued them by name, not by the organization, and harassed them and sent detectives around and like they wore them down basically. And then that was how they got tax exempt status. So it's like, it should definitely be revoked. That's millions that are being taken that people are paying to the church, and they're using it for what? Building more buildings all around. They're like trying to be like a Catholic church, like having buildings in every city. I think that's where they're trying to invest their money, I guess. But all of that money could go back to our actual children and to our society, because they're not even being taxed, and it's ridiculous.
Interesting. I have so many questions. I'm trying to formulate which one is right at this point.
I would recommend like Going Clear is a great documentary on HBO. And then Janet Reitman, that was her book, I think, Going Clear. Or no, hers was Inside Scientology. That one really delves into it too. But when I was later in my 20s, I was reading all this stuff too, because I don't know all these facts. They wouldn't, like, Scientology just had a big event in the 90s, I remember, saying, we are now a church, we won everything, like that, like a big, like, you could picture, those big stadiums and all the Scientologists are cheering, like, we're tax exempt. That's all I know,
Well, and so growing up in Scientology, being raised by the church, like, yes, absolutely, people go read the book because it does go like give a lot of Katherine's thoughts there as well. But yeah, I'd love to hear too, what was it like growing up in the church, being raised by not your parents, but other people? And yeah, give us a little background on that.
Yeah, it was very interesting because they called us adults in small bodies. We were treated as adults, but we were little guys. So by the time I was 8 years old, I thought I was, this is like a beginning chapter of my book where I'm chosen to go with my friend, and we get to go to the ranch, which is called, they kept what's called a cadet org, which is where you train to be a future Sea Org member. And to me, I'm just excited. I'm like, oh my gosh. And my older sister had been there for a while and I hadn't seen her. I get to see my older sister. I was already used to being in dorms. We had dorms in LA, but it's like, this is going to be so fun. And they have horses. So that's my viewpoint. And then as you follow along with me, there are certain things that you see that you're like, wait, that's not right. That children shouldn't be doing things. So I'm like doing labor, like doing weed whacking on the hillside to make a fire break around the ranch. And I'm 9 years old. And then, I'm working in the galley and making hot dogs for the whole 100 or so kids that there are, and doing work like that. And I'm like rarely seeing my parents. And as I'm growing up, I'm still like trying my best. I'm trying to learn more about Scientology. Eventually I get told, okay, it's time to join the Sea Org. And then I'm in the Sea Org, and the Sea Org is completely different from being at the school, which has some sense of childhood there because me and my friends are all there. There's not a lot of adult supervision. So we're also kind of silly all the time and have that aspect, at least part of an aspect of childhood. But once you're in the Sea Org, we're now lined up with like full on adults, like doing actual, what they call post. And when I'm in that situation is when I really start to question whether I can handle the amount of how much just they just want me to work, study Scientology, work, and it's just so boring to me. Honestly, it was like really what made me want to leave. Like, I want to have fun, I want to live a life, and I didn't want to just do these menial tasks that they were giving me. And how does a person leave everything behind, leave their family? I don't have any. I hadn't really met my extended family. We were told the outside world is really bad. If I left, what if I become like promiscuous, is what they said would happen, or you could take drugs, or, that outside world is so scary. But to me, it was worth trying to leave, was worth like just to get out into the real world and experience something on my own. And you could follow that journey in my book. It's kind of obvious I left, so it's like not a spoiler. Like that, it is what it is, but you could see how hard it is. I think I wanted to really capture that like mind control thought where I keep talking myself back into staying into something, and you're just like, get out. And
Yeah.
And by the time I get out, I think people are rooting for me, the reader. And I mean, nobody wants anybody to be stuck in a cult, right?
Yeah.
And I hope that it inspires other young women or men. I think it's more women might read it more because it's like a young girl growing up, but of course men may too. If they're in a situation where they see these parallels, because there are parallels. I've talked to people who've read the book, who grew up in really extremely religious groups, and the parallel of being told like, don't believe those people, and like the outside world is bad, and that type of talk is very similar.
Well, even in like daily life, like how many times have we learned to ignore ourselves? And even when your internal like compass is going, no, don't do this, you go the other direction. Like teenagers growing up in a regular high school, like learning to go along with their friends versus that listening to that internal voice going, no, this is what you should be doing instead. So yeah, hearing it on what it seems like a more extreme nature can also come down to very much, I think anybody can relate to it, because we all have those times of completely ignoring like what internally we are feeling and going with what we're seeing everybody else doing, with what we think is right or the correct path to take. So yeah, it's very relatable.
Well, especially because there is a very high price for you to make that change or to leave the church or the organization. I'm curious if there was like one kind of breaking point that you're like, no, fuck it, I'm out. Or was it just more of that slow boil until you came to that decision to leave?
It was a slow boil in the Sea Org, and there was several attempts to leave. So it wasn't all in one go. So it was hard to leave. And they also make it hard on especially cadets whose parents are in the Sea Org, because now they have to figure out where you're going to go. So they would do like, you can't leave until you get what's called a sec check, which is like a confession. But then they don't have any auditors, as the people who would do it, available to do it for you. So you're just sitting around wasting your life, like in a dorm. We'd just be lounging and doing nothing, or they'd have us go do like projects around what's called they call it the base. They use a lot of military words. And so it's a long process to even leave. And while you're doing it, people are giving you dirty looks, you're ostracized. And I'm just like, giving them all the finger in my mind while I walk around. And then obviously still trying to maintain that relationship with my parents, who are disappointed that I'm choosing to leave.
But once you did leave, they were still able to have that communication with you until your friends were on the show.
Yeah. So they were still able to see me, but I was definitely, I just recently found out, like, before they could even come and visit me, and I should have known that this would be happening, when they would come and visit me in Minneapolis with my kids once they're born, or when they came to my wedding, for example, they would be put under confessions, and they would have to promise that they wouldn't blow, which means leave the church, just to visit me. So like they were under extra pressure because the fact that I used to be in the Sea Org. So that's very sad. And then I told my mom I wasn't a Scientologist, but I did it in a way that was very relatable, because she grew up in a Pentecostal household and left that behind. And I was like, you grew up Pentecostal. and you had to find your own path, and you found Scientology. Like, I need to find my own path. And she was able to be like, okay, like I could see why if you grew up in something you want to discover for yourself. So we were able to have that balance and still see each other. But then, yeah, once they found out my friends were on Leah Remini show, then my sister called. I didn't even hear from my mom. And my older sister, she's like 6 years older. And she was like, we just don't like that you did that. And we just need some space. And normally they would say, like, we're going to disconnect from you, but they don't say that anymore. I think they're trying to change those words. And then I just didn't hear from them again. And then my cousin texted me. She's like, oh, you guys have the same holiday card. And they had picked after my holiday card came out. I don't know if it was a coincidence, but it seems like it wasn't. The same Shutterfly like image that I had done, you know, that about the border, but with just my mom and my dad and my sister. So my brother, we have a brother as well, who is moved to Minneapolis too, but had nothing to do with my friends or anything. He was cut off too. Like, none of us were on their holiday card. And it was just so, like, it felt like a statement, like, this is our new family. Very sad. So yeah.
So yeah, you said your brother got cut off too. So I assume he also left the Church of Scientology.
Yeah, but he wasn't speaking out or doing anything, and neither was I. But it's just the way, the way, I don't know. I don't understand the part where they also cut off my brother, but I also didn't understand why they cut me off.
Yeah. I think, speaking of cut off, I think Kristen's frozen and cut off. She'll be back.
Yeah.
So what made you decide to write your book then about your experience?
So growing up, I was always reading, and I would journal, and I was aware by like the time I was 9 or 10 that this wasn't a normal existence. So I was like, I had read other young memoirs, and I was thinking, I'm like, oh, I can write a book about this if anybody was curious what it's like. Because I knew there was a couple other ranches that also feed into the Sea Org. There's like, we are the Pack Ranch. There's an Int Ranch, which is Jenna Miscavige, David Miscavige's niece. She went there, and she actually her book came out way before mine, of course. And it's a huge bestseller. But I was just like, I was capturing it. And then when I was in my early 20s, leaving Scientology, or like coming out of that, I started writing it all down. Still never thinking I would publish it because of my parents and my sister. I didn't want to lose them. So then once they chose to leave me behind, or like not talk to me anymore, I was like, you know what? I have this story. I feel like somebody needs to tell the story of the Pack Ranchers, and I've been wanting to do it. I should just do it. And I thought I could do it well, like where I can do it in a way that's not angry. And it's more of like, this is what it was like. And people can really follow along. So yeah. And it's been a good experience in the sense of my other cadet friends being like, oh my gosh, like you validated our existence. Like, this was how it was. And like, they're like, there's so many parallels of things that were happening to me that they had no idea was happening, that was happening to them as well, with like the self-talk and the manipulation that was happening, where the Sea Org was keeping us in or from leaving. So that has been really amazing. And then obviously just more stories out there about Scientology, the better.
I was going to say, what was your hope with publishing it? Was it for the people that were in it, or for people like us outside of the organization to have a better understanding? What was your hope to have for the impact of the book?
I was hoping to have it for the people who have no idea about Scientology, and having it more written, more of a, what's the word? Like, I've written it as a young adult memoir. So it's very fast. It's an easy read, not a lot of Scientology words. I've made it so it's more accessible for people, I hope, to really get that picture. And it's written with my friends as people. They're not just cardboard people around me. I love all the memoirs out there about Scientology, and they're all great. Some of them have been ghostwritten too. Mine is just, I thought I can tell a really good story of my childhood, and I thought people could relate to it.
Yeah. And
perspective.
The way it's written, to me, felt like it's written somewhat like how a fiction story would be written, but it's not a fictional story. So it's got like that flow. You're jumping in, we're following you along in your life. And so it is an easy read, and like, I want to keep going in it and find out what's going to happen next. So yeah, the way you tell it is really well done.
Thank you. Yeah, that means a lot to me. And it was very intentional. I wanted it to be something that people can read and not have to constantly go to a glossary.
Mhm.
I tried to fill in when I would say a Scientology word, which I didn't use all of the Scientology words. I just did it when it was natural and what was happening in my life. I would just try to explain in the words around it instead of being like, footnote, stop reading and go read the footnote.
Yeah.
And I figured people and I'm like this, when I'm reading a book and there's a word I don't know, or history I don't know, I will stop and go on Wikipedia for a while and read for a while and come back if I want to. But if I don't want to, I can just keep reading. And I like the uninterrupted flow idea of just telling my story and that in those eyes and including the scenery, including the visual, what it's like. Because when people can picture themselves somewhere, they are going to connect more with it and they're going to resonate more with it. And I hope that's what I captured with my book. And I think I did. So,
yeah. I'm excited. It's on its way for me as well. So
Uh-huh.
I'm like excited to get it.
Well, if you guys want to do like a follow-up, we could totally do it. And
absolutely.
if listening reads it, then we could do like questions and stuff.
Yeah. I've requested that my library get it too. So
good idea.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. When I get notified when a library adds my book to their collection, that makes me so excited.
It's a good idea. I'll do that too.
Yeah. Oh man, I had questions, but I wanted to hear, because you mentioned before we started, to Karan that you had a period story from like growing up within Scientology. So I wanted to hear that story.
Yeah. So when I was around 10, my friend was like, basically I knew about periods because I was living in a dorm with up to 13-year-olds. But all I knew was that like you bleed and then you have to stop it. Like you have to put a maxi pad and a tampon. And once you bleed, you're able to have babies. So I kind of had like the basic structure. And I don't remember being scared about it, but I was just like, oh, that sounds like it'll be very annoying, was like my thought. So then,
and it is.
So when it happened, I wasn't scared. And my friend was like jealous because she was a year older and hadn't gotten it yet. And she's like, I can't believe it. I was young. I was only 10. She's like, I can't believe you got it before me. And I was just like, oh gosh, how am I going to afford to buy these pads? Was what I was thinking. And then down the road though, when we were all going to go swimming, there was a pool and we had gone to a camping trip. My friend was like, you have to come swimming. I'm like, I can't, I'm on my period. And she's like, oh, just use a tampon. And I was like, I don't know how to use a tampon. And she's like, I'll walk you through it. So like my 11-year-old, actually, I think I was 11 by then, she was 12, was like, hey, go in the tent. Because we were camping. So I remember like my first experience of putting in a tampon was like my friend standing outside the tent being like walking me through the instructions so that I could go swimming in a pool, which was very helpful.
Yeah. It was so funny because I remember having a summer and I was also away from my parents and wanting to go to the beach and never having used a tampon before. And it was like an aunt, but my uncle's wife, so not like related to me. And I was quite young. I was like 13, 14. And she's like, it's the same hole the boys go in. I'm like, there's no boys going in any hole. I still don't know what you're talking about. You're just so cavalier about like, that hole. I'm like, no, I do not. I do not, ma'am. But just that assumption that like, you're 13 now, I'm like,
oh my gosh, you're like no, please.
No, please. Yeah. So that was not helpful instruction.
I remember though, because one thing that I've noticed now as an adult is a lot of, at least at Minneapolis, they've tried to be way better about providing sanitary products around, because there were times when I didn't have maxi pads when I was young and couldn't afford it, or tampons, and I would just have to use toilet paper. And that's like the saddest thing ever. Because I didn't have money also growing up, like I was very poor. So I love that now some cities at least and gyms just provide that sanitary product. Like you don't have to have 2 quarters or whatever.
Yeah.
It's pretty awesome.
So so then when you were as a cadet, so they wouldn't provide that stuff? Like how would you
I had to buy it or I'd borrow it from my friends. And I had this, it's in my book. We all got paid because we were little adults, apparently, and got $15 a week. It was like 13 something after FICA was taken out, which I should Google what FICA is. But I just stopped getting paid, and I found out it was because I didn't have a social security number. And I would call my mom. She's like, yeah, I guess like I forgot, like, because she had me in like an apartment building with a midwife. So she never filed for that. And so then I wasn't getting paid, and nothing's done to help me. And I'm just like trying to figure out how to buy like my shampoo and conditioner, how I don't have shoes at one point in my book, like, and along with sanitary products, like I couldn't, at one point I had only one pair of underwear. So I'm like this young child trying to figure out how to take care of myself, and ashamed that I can't take care of myself. It never even occurs to me to be like, whoa, adults, look at me, I need help here. Like, I'm just embarrassed, and I'm like borrowing from my friends. I beg my mom to get me shoes, and finally she follows through. Like, it takes her forever because she also doesn't have a lot of money. It's very humbling, I'll say. And I'm like, to this day, it affects me. Like, when I have to buy clothes for my kids, I always make sure they have their clothes that they need. But if I can get it on Thrift, or if I can get it like from the Buy Nothing groups on Facebook, like it's really hard for me to like spend money when I know they're going to outgrow it. So I'm like, but I always make sure they have, just to be clear. But it's just like for things like materialist, like to buy an expensive purse, like no way, I'm not doing that. Like, that's a waste of money because of my like thoughts about money. The only thing I like to spend money on is like adventures. Like, my husband and I like to travel and do fun stuff with our kids because that's part of life. But like things, I'm like, I'm like, oh no, our couch is like looking like, not great. But I'm like, do we really need to buy a couch? Like that type of stuff it's interesting how that sticks with you.
Yeah. And I'm curious too, because like if I were to enter into Scientology today, I would be paying money to go through each of the levels. When you're born into it, how does that work because you are being raised and you're going into the Sea Org? Did your parents have to pay, or was it like because you're in the Sea Org, you're working and so you're earning what you're learning?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you get to do Scientology studies for free, but then guess what? Another thing that hangs on you if you're going to leave is you have to pay all of that money back for all of that training you did. So, which is wild. So it doesn't start till you join, when you're joining the Sea Org, and before you join the Sea Org, you have something called the EPF. This word just means the group of people who have to do like labor and study 5 courses before they join the Sea Org. You have to pay for that. Whereas, as we all know, like when you go and join a company and they send you off for training, they pay for it. And it's not like when you leave, they're like, hey, pay me back for that conference I sent you to, like you're working for them. So it should be all part of it. But when you leave, I had friends who were put on full-time Scientology training so they could be auditors by the time they were 12 years old, training all the way till they're like 20. So they had like $70,000 in debt to the Church of Scientology when they left at 19 years old, 20 years old. And then it's like, how are you even going to pay it? And some of them were making payments on it. I had just the EPF because I like never went on course because I would be naughty and do other things. So I had to pay $5,000 though to get in good standing. But I was just like, I'll give you like $5. Like I would do like a trickle amount so I could say I was paying and be in good standing so I could see my family. But isn't that wild that they literally had these young kids like us who they told, your job is to join the Sea Org. You don't get to do anything else. You don't get to be a doctor. You don't get to be a vet. You can't be this or a gymnast or whatever. Like, this is what you're doing. Then they train us. And then when we decide to leave and have a life, they're like, oh, and you need to pay us all that money back. It's like really, really horrible.
Yeah. How do they choose who's like going to be in the Sea Org?
Yeah. So many are called, few are chosen. That's what they told us so we could feel special. But really, it was just like, you're an able body, get in the Sea Org. Now, if you were suicidal or something, which is like, they really look down on like mental health, then I think they would not let you join. Because like when I was supposed to join, there's a moment where they're like, hey, somebody reported this piece of paper where you said, I hate my life, this sucks, life sucks. I was like, yeah, I'm 13, what do you expect me to be writing? That's what I said. I'm like, no, I'm not going to kill myself, because they were like, they don't want to have that on their hands. But otherwise, like, yeah, if you can work, you should be here working and be doing the Sea Org. So it's not really many are called, few are chosen. It's like, you guys were born here and we're going to put you in the Sea Org. Now there's Scientology parishioners. They have children and they go to like normally like Scientology, but they're not called Scientology schools. They're like really good privates, or not good, but expensive private schools. And then when they eventually by 15 and 16, they start to get recruited too. So I encounter when I'm in the Sea Org, the kids who are like who are the public Scientologist children, and what it's like for them and that type of pressure, which is different because they have somewhere to go if they leave. So there's somebody who's trying to leave at the same time as me, and she's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to my mom and go to her apartment, and we'll go back to high school. It's like, oh, that's nice to know what you're gonna do.
Yeah. Yeah, because you were actually like, you lived there, so yeah, you didn't really have anywhere else to go.
So I just wanted to clarify. So you said you went to the ranch at like 8-ish, right? So with your parents and your parents were in the Sea Org?
Yes.
Okay. So where did you live with them before then?
So before that, I was in dorms again, but it was in LA, and it was in like, my parents were on a different floor. So they were on like the third floor or the second floor, depending where their room was at the time. And they shared like a small apartment space with another couple normally. And then they would like have the dual kitchen. That was at the beginning when I was like 6 years old, and they would pick me up on Saturday nights, and we would have spend the night Saturday night and have Sunday morning with them. This is me, and I had 3 siblings. So we would like do 2 per bed because of a bunk bed. But then eventually when my sister gets sent to the ranch, by the time she was probably 10 or 11, then they stopped picking us up on the Saturday nights. And then it was just the Sunday morning, and we would like go to Rite Aid and get ice cream, or it's like similar to like, grocery store. And that was like our family time. Like if they need to do laundry, we'd go do laundry together and get ice cream. And that was our family time every Sunday morning until I was 8, when I got sent to the ranch.
Wow.
Then they would have one family day they used to do when we were 6. That was once a year, where they would take us all on a picnic or something, have buses, and everybody would get to go. So that was one day. And then you'd have Christmas. Those are your family times.
So you still had Christmas?
Yeah. But it was like, so as I got older, I would just see them later after Christmas. I think normally I would just generally have Christmas just at the ranch with my friends, and maybe we'd buy each other little gifts like from the dollar store. And then I would eventually see my parents when I could see them. They would treat Christmas like, oh, that's not a good day for Christmas. So the Sea Org, you guys are all this org, you're going to celebrate Christmas on this day. And then that's just the day they would celebrate Christmas like that.
Interesting.
But it wasn't like about religion or Jesus Christ or anything. It was just about, this is the day we give out presents.
Presents. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And well, now you're out, you're sharing your story. We like to ask about good trouble. I mean, you've obviously been creating good trouble, but when you hear that phrase, what does it mean to you? And then how are you creating good trouble?
Yeah, good trouble would just mean trouble that makes people think more for themselves and go against the grain. Maybe if the grain, like if that flow that everybody else is on is not a good one. So if everybody's piling on someone, for example, for doing something wrong, like, do you need to do that? Probably not, especially if they've apologized. So yeah, for myself, it feels good to be speaking out. It took a lot. The first interview I did was with somebody who was in the Sea Org at the same time as me. So he was very kind and a good person to speak with, because he knew what I was going through mentally, to be out and to have my face out there. 2 weeks before this book came out, I was literally like, I'm going to do everything anonymous. I'm not even going to have my name on there. So my friend who I grew up with as well was like, you know what, like, I'll have to say, like, she had been speaking out, and she's like, there's something freeing about having your name out there and to break that chain. And like, yeah, I'm creating trouble, good trouble, and it feels good, but it was very hard for me to do. And now I'm glad I did it. Although still part of me, it's like, I'm worried about my parents and if they're under any duress because of me. But I also had the story to tell, and it was like, they have chosen, in the end, they could leave, or they could say, no, I want to see my daughter, but they have to create that decision for themselves. So I'm hoping like maybe this cognitive dissonance of like knowing I am out there, I am speaking out, and maybe they'll be like, well, maybe something isn't right about this. Maybe we should be able to see my daughter and their other son, Jason, and and maybe they would leave. I mean, I'm trying not to give up. And I think that first half year, I would like send flowers and still do things to try to be like, hey, I'm still here, because I didn't quite believe that they disconnected from me. And then when I realized that they had, emotionally, I had to just focus on my family. I had baby twins, and I had a 3-year-old, and my husband was traveling for work. It was just like, I need to just be here and present, and I can't control what they're doing. So I kind of just like stopped trying for a few years because they weren't responding to anything. And I would hear from my aunts who would still talk to them, and I would know that they were okay. They were not Scientologists, my aunts, but they could have these conversations. But now I think I'm coming to a place where I'm like, now that I'm out, I'm like, I think I'm going to try to like just send more notes and let them know I'm here. If they want to leave, you don't need to leave. My parents are past retirement age. There's no reason for the Sea Org to keep them. So, but I don't have a way of reaching them, honestly. Like, they have that type of control. So
It, like what you were saying too, is that initial fear of putting your name out there because of what might happen. I mean, it's a huge freeing step to be able to say, well, what I have to say matters, and that the other people that are involved, they are adults who get to make their own decisions within this. So I get to say what's true for me. And they get to decide how they handle it or what they do with this information. So, but that's such a huge step that's really hard to make. And so, yeah, to be able to allow yourself to do that and to put your name on it. And in fact, using the name that people from Scientology will recognize too, it's a big step. So that definitely is some good trouble.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a journey. And like my friends that I grew up with, some of them unfriended me on social media. You know, I'm in Minneapolis, so I'm not really in LA. It's where most of my friends are. And then some of them DM me quietly, like, hey, I can't say anything. I'm still connected to my parents, but this is so cool. Like, to have that support, it's like all of it has been worth it, even though it was hard, but it's really cool. And like, I didn't do this to make money. Anybody knows you do not make a lot of money from a book. I did this to share a story. I'm doing it because I think it's important to talk about the children of the Sea Org as another aspect of what is wrong with the cult of Scientology, really, and why it shouldn't be called a religion. That would be the big step, is if like enough people really cared, we can take that, or take that the tax exempt status away. That's already huge, because those tax dollars that they're not having to pay, they use this money to harass people and send PIs and like do things like that, or cover up rapes and things like that for Danny Masterson. Like, that's not okay for this huge organization to just exist and not have any consequences. So I'm happy to be one little person in that circle, of a larger circle that's coming out and speaking out.
Yeah. So it seems to be more and more too, like there's more people speaking. So yeah, hopefully that tax exempt status, the more people that speak, that it's able to go away, so that it does people do start looking at it too, like, yes, this is a cult, and like anything, you get to decide if you want to stay in it, but also
exactly. And even the people in it, if they're going, oh, Catherine's now speaking out, this person's not speaking out, that like, they're not all, we can't all be liars. Like, that's what Scientology will label people who speak out. They're liars. They're this, that they try to like attack their character. Luckily, I have not been attacked. I think I'm I'm a small fish to fry, when you got Leah Remini out there taking all the heat, and Aaron Smith-Levin, he's got a great SPTV YouTube channel. I did an interview with him as well. But he, like, the amount of money and attention they put on attacking people who are telling their stories, it's like, that's a big red flag. Everybody sees this. Like, why aren't you saying, hey, we're sorry, maybe we should have treated these children better? Or like, oh, we'll stop attacking you. And like, this is what they believe, or they don't want to be part of our church. That's their choice. That's okay. Instead, they're like, you guys are all horrible people. So I'm hoping my friends that I grew up with are like, that are still in it. I have friends who are cadets who are still in the Sea Org now at the end of the 30s, just like, get out now. What if you want to have kids? Like, you still have time, maybe one of them will see my book and be like, oh, it's from the ranch, kind of want to read it. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting because you hear on like Leah's show and stuff all about like the PIs and the like all the shit that people go through when they're leaving. Other than your parents like disconnecting from you, have you, which is huge, like don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to trivialize that at all. Have you had any kind of issues with the organization coming after you?
I haven't, so I'm super thankful. I'm like, I honestly, it's like, is it an insult maybe that they don't want it? Like, I don't want it in my life. Like I am also far away. I'm not in LA. Like, it's easier to harass people who are right down the street from you. They'd have to pay for somebody to fly all the way out here, or maybe hire someone who works here. But the things that they could do, though, I'm like, what can they do? Paper my neighborhood and say what? What can you say about a child? Nothing. I don't think they can say anything. So I also don't think they have anything to say for me. Whereas like some of the people who've left, like, anyway, none of the reasons why they attack people make sense. But I did go through, what could they do that would hurt me? Like, I actually really don't know. Because even if they papered my neighborhood, what would that say? This person was a bad cadet. Yeah, I know. It's in my book title.
That's what I called it. So thanks for putting my book title out there.
That too. Like, there's not really, what they have done is taken, like, I did manage to get a phone number. Somebody listened to my interview with Aaron Smith-Levin and this other woman, Nora Ames, and they reached out. They had recently been in the Sea Org. They knew where my parents were. They had a phone number, which was crazy. I had no way of reaching them because the only way to call was through the church and leave a message, and I would never hear back. So I called them and I did talk to them, and that was amazing. And I told my mom about my book, and she was not very happy about it, but she knows. And I said, it wasn't meant to attack Scientology, because it's not. I'm telling the story of me growing up. It's just, people are going to form their opinions, rightly so, about what it is. And it was a good conversation. I said, I'm always here. But then the phone line literally got disconnected like the next day. And my brother tried to call. So that part has been like, it's very intentional that they're keeping her from me and my dad. I'm like, they're getting old. Like, I would like to take care of them, or like be there for them. I would like them to see their grandkids. So I'm like, have I made it worse by having this book? Because now they really will never let them see me. But I'm like, but they already weren't allowed to see me. So really, what has changed? I actually got to speak with them because of the book, because somebody saw me interview. So that was a positive, and I'm going to just keep trying to reach out. And my older sister, I got to see if I could somehow reach her. But right now it's like they've battened down the hatches, I think, on people in the Scientology Sea Org, and they're trying not to let them talk to the outside world. And it's not okay. And it's ridiculous, right? It's like, how is that happening? It's really happening. Yeah.
I'm curious.
Sorry,
I'm curious. Go ahead.
We're both at the same time. I was just thinking, it's like one of those things where they might even know, like, this is getting to a breaking point. So let's protect the people that are still like loyal within the organization before we lose more. They might know the end is near for them.
Yeah, I mean, they have so much bad press right now. So I couldn't imagine anybody joining Scientology who was like a full-grown adult being like, oh, I still want to learn about this, you know? So I know their membership is dwindling a lot. And eventually all of those big whales that they call them, like people who are huge Scientology donors who have a lot of money, like they're not going to live forever. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that was literally going to be my question. Like, I imagine the like numbers of Scientologists it must be in decline. Do you find a lot of people that grew up in the church like yourself are also leaving, or are those the people more likely to stay?
I have found that most cadets have left
Mm.
that I grew up with and are even not Scientologists, but they have to be quiet about that because they can't lose their parents who are in the Sea Org. So, and then the ones who stayed are the ones who are like kind of, you know, stuck in that world. So I hope that they'll leave. Like one of them left recently because they got pregnant. So like I was saying, that does happen. So that's great. And she seems happy. And like I see them on social media because I still have some friends and I won't say who, and nobody's going to listen to it. I mean, this is the paranoia. I'm like, well, they have what's called OSA, which is like, you could picture like Black Ops or like the Russian spies or something who like, I'm
All of
always
a sudden our numbers go
like,
really high.
they're not going to be listening to this. I'm like, well, but anyway.
If our numbers all of a sudden like quadruple, yes, they've listened.
They've got their OSA bots out there. But yeah, I have friends and I see they're all still hanging out. And I've talked to some of them who like DM me and they're like, no, none of us are in, like none of us practice Scientology. We just keep it quiet because we can't lose our parents. And I'm like, it's such a sad existence though, even for them to have to like pretend and like they all act like they're like everything's fine, but at least they're not Scientologists. So it's a step.
Yeah. It's so interesting how many like groups other than Scientology, like we had a young woman, and this was like a couple of years ago now, who had left. Was it a Christian fundamentalist group that she had left?
I believe it was Jewish Orthodox.
Jewish Orthodox, who had left, you know, such a strict culture, and then same thing, you know, the kind of punishment for that is just completely being disowned by your family. For an organization, and I mean, sometimes you got to think like, what is the difference between a religion and a cult? And to me, like when I left the Catholic Church, no one told my parents they couldn't talk to me, right? And like no one cares at the Catholic Church what I do or do not do. And I guess that to me is like the difference between like a cult is so much more controlling. And yeah, we talked to a young girl, this was a couple of years ago, like I said, who had left the Jewish Orthodox Church, and same thing, like her family's not talking to her, and like the like I said, the price is so high to leave that it's like you no longer have free will. I mean, you do, but like to lose pretty much everything when you leave is such a high price to pay.
It really is. And that's a really big way of how they control people is that part is like, you don't want to lose everything.
Yeah.
And especially like my parents who dedicated let's see, at least 40 years of their life to throw it away. And even if you left saying, okay, I'm just still a Scientologist, it's still like a part of you. It's like you're leaving that you're so comfortable now in this like existence where they tell you every decision is made for you. You cannot just go and take a day off and go somewhere. Like you have to request time to take a full day off. You get that little morning chunk I told about, but if you want a full day to just go enjoy yourself, you need to request it and get like at least 4 people to approve that. Like this is the amount of minutia and like everything that they do is under control by somebody else. So how scary would that be too, to be like, how will I make my own choices and do my own, make my, like, where will I go and everything. So there's a lot for people to lose, especially if they're the older generation, like my parents. And then the younger generation, I'm like, get out now. Like you have a chance to build your life up. All of them should get out now. And there's a group called the Aftermath Foundation. And they are now helping people who are in the Sea Org, and they will help them get set up, which is amazing. Like to have that out there and available is really cool.
I imagine for like the first generation too, there's that fear of like, what if I was wrong? Like, what if this choice I made actually was the wrong choice? I've just now dedicated decades of my life to it. Now what? So,
exactly. Like you said, you watched Mike Rinder's interview, like for him to have come out, he was number 3 at the top of the church of the chain, for his name to be out there too, and like for Scientologists to see that and be like, so that's really empowering. Like, oh, this he left and he restarted his life, and he actually got married and is having kids, like a whole second family, which is like, it is possible. And so all of these stories I'm telling, Mike Rinder's telling, Jenna Miscavige is told, I think will eventually pierce through that bubble that they have, hopefully, and maybe more and more will trickle out. And I mean, this church or cult will not, I don't think it'll be around past 50. I mean, I can't make these predictions, but I'm like, there's no way. It feels like it's slowly crumbling down, but it takes work and it takes effort, and it's not just going to happen on its own.
I'm curious, like, why are there so many actors and actresses in Scientology? Like, what is the draw for them to be in Scientology?
It's the connections, I think. Like, if you're in it and you join that group, then there might, they have an agent for you, or they'll help you get started. And then you're in this small group. And also when you first join Scientology, like the attitude of people in Scientology is very upbeat and happy. So you're like, oh, this is a great group of people. And like, you probably are lost a little bit when you're in Hollywood. So now you're like, oh, I'm going to be here. And like, oh, Danny Masterson also is in this play at the church, because they do this every Christmas. They would do these plays, and Ashton Kutcher would be in it, and Mila Kunis. So if you're an actor, you're getting to hobnob with like Laura Prepon, Jason Lee wasn't at the time, Juliette Lewis. I saw these people. I went to parties because I was a Scientologist, and it's like such a small insular world. So if you're an actor, like how cool is that? So it's a big draw, and they really cater to celebrities. They are not treated the same as regular Scientologists. They are like,
they have like the celebrity center.
Yeah.
All that stuff. So how is that different
with the regular public? Huh?
How is that different?
Yeah. Like, so they're not with the regular public. Anything that happens that's bad. So for example, somebody says, oh, Danny Masterson raped me. They're like, whoa, Danny Masterson's a celebrity who speaks well about Scientology. They're going to be on Danny Masterson's side. And then they're just going to try to shut that down, basically. Be like, it wasn't rape. Like, one of them was his girlfriend. So it's like, you're his girlfriend. It's like, that's not how it works. You could still be raped and be in a relationship with someone. So they are really catered to. Tom Cruise, for example, all of his staff around him are SEERG members or Scientologists. So that means everybody around him will never, ever question anything he does. How nice would that be? If you were like God, basically, if nobody could ever be like, oh, Tom, I don't think that's a good idea. Like, they're always gonna be like, yes, Tom, like treat him like he knows it all. And he's treated in Scientology as if he's like a god. Like they like had a whole video about him and gave him this Medal of Honor, the Freedom Medal of Honor. He's like, this is the best award I ever got. And Scientologists are like, wow, Tom Cruise is on our side. Like, this makes it even more great. Like, it's so true that this is such a good religion. When it's all not. But yeah, the celebrities get treated like deities, basically.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, very.
I mean, they get treated a little too well in like regular society as well. To be honest. So
now you have another place that continues to treat them like that. Like, don't you want to be humbled sometimes? Like, don't you want to grow? No, not them.
No.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's the stories you hear, like Tom Cruise is like, but they're like, the David Miscavige was like, we're gonna find him a girlfriend, a Scientologist girlfriend, and was like interviewing young Scientologist women to be his girlfriend, and they found him one, and then she said like one thing to him, like, oh, I don't think it's okay, or something like really small, and she was made to scrub a bathroom with a toothbrush to make up for talking to Tom Cruise like that. Like, it's like, that's unreal, right? That they have this control over his life and on the people who are Scientologists. They're like, you need to make sure he's happy.
Yeah, and I've heard of that, like, oh, this person auditioned to be Tom Cruise's girlfriend. I'm like, what the fuck does that mean?
It with like Scarlett Johansson, and then I think he even dated Penelope Cruz for a while, and then she was like, I'm out. Like, this is like weird. And then Katie Holmes, they found out she had a crush on him when she was young. So they're like, she's the one. And she was down for it until she realized, she got out though. But she signed an NDA, so she hasn't really spoken out about anything. But that would be amazing if she eventually was like, screw this NDA. I was under pressure. This doesn't count. Invalid.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when he started dating Katie Holmes. To me, I was like, "What? She's around my age," and
No.
she was talking about how like she had a poster hanging of him up in her room. I'm like, that's a little weird to me, like all this
Yeah.
going on. So then now looking back on it and hearing like she was interviewed to be his girlfriend. I'm like, oh, it all makes so much more
Well, she
sense
was
now.
manipulated basically.
Yeah.
With her past crush, she was like an easy one to get. And I think she's a sweet person. So I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
excited and didn't think
Yeah.
anything further.
And she's
Yeah.
just coming off Dawson's Creek and early into fame. So, yeah, of course. This is amazing. Tom Cruise is
Yeah.
my crush, is interested
I
in.
know. And think about this. He doesn't even go see Siri. Like she's probably, Tom Cruise is just like, oh, this child is not important to me because she's probably a suppressive person. Like they compartmentalize everything. And when you're, again, that big word of that phrase, saving the world, it makes everything else less important because you're saving the world. So like, oh, and you believe in reincarnation too in Scientology. So it's like, I've had many lives or I've had children. I will sacrifice my daughter this life because I need to do what's best for the world. Like what a weird concept, right?
Well,
Sad.
especially like L. Ron Hubbard is a science fiction writer.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm like,
and nobody knows about the aliens that come out like in the upper levels of the bridge. Most Scientologists are beneath that level. And then when they get there, they've already put in hundreds of thousands of dollars and they're like, oh, maybe.
yeah.
Because now everything around you is about this. And now you have to believe an alien came and like dropped the instant a volcano. I'm like, I still don't really understand, even though I've read it a few times. It's just wild.
Well, and then so there was certain like was a certain amount of levels, right? And then I guess was it that people started reaching whatever the levels, and then all of a sudden like, oh, we found more writing, so now there's more levels, so people still had to keep paying and to
Or
keep
you have
going
to
up and up.
the level. So they're like, oh, you guys all did what's called, this happened just recently in the early 2000s, what's called the basics. And it's like all the like, it's actually really, L. Ron Hubbard did a good job of taking material from different like Buddhism or just regular self-help about how to communicate, how to have a happy marriage. These normal tools to like exist. He wrote them out in a very like well-written way, or not like, it was just, that's how when they first join, they actually do have good moments where like, oh, now I know how to communicate to my spouse, or now I know how to do this. This is why this is happening. So there are little tools at the beginning, baseline of Scientology, and then everybody does those. And then like literally like 10 years later, like, never mind, those basics were all wrong. You're going to do it again. And they just reworded it and repackaged it. And they made everybody buy them. They were like $3,000, not joking, for like 10 of these books. And my mom was calling me, you should buy these basics. I'm like, Mom, I'm not even a Scientologist. Why would I buy those? She's like, well, I already bought my own. I have them in my room. I'm like, why? You have it at the org. I'm like, no. Like she wanted to, and it's just so sad. I'm like, you don't have a lot of money. All you get is your Social Security check, because she's like over 65. And then the little bit of stipend, they get like $35 after taxes a month. Every 2 weeks or every week. Anyway.
Well, and imagine growing up in Scientology, though, you must think that these were his ideas, that like this is the teachings of L. Ron Hubbard, not knowing that like, no, this is like basic therapy, or you know what I mean, that it's not something unique to the organization, that these things happen outside, which, and like you were saying, that you know, the idea of that if you left, you were going to become promiscuous and do drugs, and I'm like, there's plenty of us out here that are none of those things, but I imagine learning those teachings, especially growing up, that it must feel like he like invented them. And like,
oh no, it totally, he was the creator. He's so smart. He's a genius. That's how I felt about him. And it's like, you cannot question what he says. If you don't understand it, you go back and read it and find what word you don't understand. It's like what you get told to do all the time. Nobody will explain his words to you. You need to read L. Ron Hubbard's words and find it out for yourself. It's very much like he knows it all. And now looking back, I'm like, oh, a lot of that was pulled from other material, but they don't tell you that when you're reading all that. They're just like, he's brilliant. And it's so funny because he literally has papers on everything, like how to wash a window. Like I literally read the policy by Ellen Hubbard about how to wash a window. Like, why?
So much writing to do. I can't imagine.
So much. Like, how did he write this much?
Yeah.
Like,
rooms and rooms of writing.
yeah, it is. I'm like, it's wild.
Yeah, I remember
such an imagination on him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I remember as a younger person driving by, because we have a Church of Scientology building here in Vancouver, and I just remember thinking like, oh, a church with science, like that sounds like exactly up my alley. As like I said, someone who left the Catholic Church, I was like, a church with science, like that's got, but yeah, then this is not what it is.
Yeah, no, and
Church.
I think did that intentionally. Science,
yeah. It's science fictionology.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, we obviously could talk forever, but and later on, after we've fully read the book, love to talk with you.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Love to. Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really great conversation. And anybody who like wants to know more, like we talked about where they can go to also, but also read my book if you want to read like a young coming of age memoir. It's very fun, which is a weird word to describe for a cult book, but I would say it kind of is.
Yeah. And it's fun in a way of being very relatable too. Like, I mean, because people want to understand, why did somebody join a cult or why is somebody part of a cult? But that's because we're all afraid we can do it ourselves, which we have in some way or another, most likely because of the world we live in. So
people surprised at how many intelligent people join cults. And I didn't have a choice in my scenario, but I mean, my parents are not dumb, but they just got bought into something. And it's,
Yeah. So where can our listeners go to learn more, like to get your book, or is there somewhere too if they want to learn more from you about Scientology and you? Is there somewhere where they can go to find you also?
Yeah, they can get my book anywhere for ebook on all those platforms, and Amazon for paperback. I'm hoping to get my Audible out in like 2 months, but you can follow me, or maybe a month, we'll see. I'm halfway there. And you can follow me at Bad Cadet on Instagram and Twitter. And for sure, I'll announce there when the Audible comes out. If you're like, oh, I'm going to wait till the Audible, just follow me there. And on my Bad Cadet Instagram page, I put photos from the ranch. So if you're curious what it looked like, what that child, just to get a little bit more of a peek into my childhood. And that's available for anybody who wants it.
Yeah. And well, yep. I lost my thought. I'm reading the question right here too. Well, before we get to our very last question, do you remember the joke that you had ChatGPT make? Otherwise, I can ask it. I have it down.
Tell me it.
Okay. This one needs to, we haven't done pirate jokes in a while, but it needs to because it was good. So how do pirates recruit new members to their cult? They use a hook, line, and sinker.
Oh yes, very good. Thanks, ChatGPT. Got me out of a bind when you're like, can you give me a pirate joke? I'm like, ChatGPT, what do you got? About cults. I'm so bad at jokes too.
Before we go, last question. How would you recommend our listeners kind of breaking free and starting their own pirate life or their pirate journey?
I would recommend, I think we talked about this a little bit in the middle of our whole conversation, is just always stay true to yourself. And then if you just take that one step at a time, like, okay, like this job is not giving me joy, then it's like, okay, well, what's the thing that does give me joy? And just start there. So anywhere, anything you have a question about, whether it's relationship, just looking inward and being like, what is something I want? And like, maybe jump starting from there. One step at a time, though. I know it's not easy.
Yeah, great advice.
Yeah, Katherine, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I'm like excited. I didn't say this, but I've done the whole group of cult podcasts and YouTube. So I'm trying to come out into other podcasts just because I really want to share the story all around. So I'm so glad you guys let me have this opportunity.